Hey there, welcome back to another video. Today we have a TH400. It's out of a 1990 Chevy Silverado C3500 HD, and the problem with this thing is that it does not want to go into second gear. So, you put it in drive, it moves forward like usual, and then once we upshift from first to second, you have a false neutral condition. So after a lot of RPMs, it will eventually shift into third and then, more or less behave itself while it's still in third gear. And then of course the downshift, you have another false neutral condition until you get back to first gear. So that leads me to believe that the intermediate roller clutch has failed in this thing, and the fluid stinks, so I'm thinking there's probably applied element damage, friction material as well. So it needs a full overhaul. So let's get a bit closer to the bench and we'll start ripping into it and see what we can find. Alright, just before you start taking everything apart, you want to just do a quick check of end play. So the spec is 7 to 19 thousandths both for the front and the rear of these transmissions, and like 480Es, you do not want to have more end play in the rear than you do in the front. So this is a bolt-on yoke variety. That nut is for the most part finger tight, and then we have a variety of socket sizes on these. So 9/16 for the pump, 1/2 inch for our governor cover, as well as our modulator, and then this should be 9/16 as well. And then we have the little selector nut for the linkage, and that's on finger loose. So this was remanufactured at some point in the past. Not sure which company did the work, and I have no idea how long ago. Customer, to my knowledge, hasn't had the vehicle for very long, so he wants to get the transmission sorted so that he can kind of determine what he wants to do next with it. So let's go ahead and take it down, and we'll see what's up with it. I think these bolts for the rear trans mount are either 9/16 or 5/8. In fact, I think they're 5/8. I'm going to get that out of the way first and get this nut off, and then we'll proceed. All right. You always want to check your rear trans mount for excessive wear. It's not recommended that you ever reuse these. If they're starting to dry rot or tear or anything like that. I mean, common sense obviously, but as you can see, this one has seen better days, so it'll go in the trash and I'll have the customer purchase a new one. Alright, let's get this bolt-on yoke bolt out of there. That's way too big, it must be 3/4. So unfortunately, I don't know how many miles are on this thing. That's not good. I don't know how many miles are on it. There's not a lot of history, at least that I'm aware of at the moment. So we'd be interested to see exactly what this Reman company did. Unfortunately, most remanufacturing, or at least large-scale remanufacturing companies for transmissions, they really don't do everything that you would want them to do. Things like replacing bushings, thrust washers, electrical components, electronics, although that D10 solenoid case connector does look new to me. So, perhaps this company is maybe an exception, we don't know. But that does definitely look new. Alright, when you have your yoke, you want to inspect the journal. We have obvious signs of a groove being cut into the journal here by the seal, so this will always leak no matter what you do with the extension housing seal because of that groove, so he'll need a new one of those as well. Let me go ahead and get the seal out of here, then we'll take the extension housing off and then work our way, to the pan, belly the case, and then evacuate it. Alright, seal out of the way. Let's go ahead and remove the extension housing. So 9/16. So there has been a menagerie of changes over the years when it comes to the TH400s. And it would be damn near impossible for me or anyone else to list them all in one video. Otherwise, this would be like literally the Lawrence of Arabia of TH400 teardown, or really any transmission for that matter. But a couple of notable ones for this vintage of 400s, you know, very late model. There's a 5th check ball added to the case. And so those were not present prior to 88. Now, with TH400s, you can have a check ball configuration that only uses the reverse check ball and the intermediate clutch check ball. You know, and that's basically it. And leave all the others out. But I admit, and I've not done my research on this, so shame on me, I do not know if this 5th check ball is also one of those that you can leave out. Alright, so we already see a big no-no here, and I have no idea who could have done this. Hopefully not the Reman company, but you never use RTV on any surface for these transmissions. The pan does not need it, the speedo housing and either gear or sensor does not need it. You just simply don't need it. Same with the governor cover, pump to case, you know, perimeter O-ring. You don't need any kind of RTV there. All RTV does is create the risk that pieces of it will break off and get into a lube circuit and restrict that circuit, possibly destroying the transmission. I mean, if you're having a problem with this half inch, if you're having a problem with sealing in any of those areas, then either the part itself is worn or the you know, the part that is you know, housing it is worn, and you know, you have to deal with those the right way, which is replacement. Or if there's like a case saver or some other repair procedure, you can do that. So note the O-ring on the modulator. The modulator looks relatively new. These are adjustable, so you turn it either, you know, counterclockwise or clockwise, and that will slightly increase the RPM in which the shifts occur and make them a little bit firmer, or slightly decrease the RPM in which the shifts occur and make them a little softer, but it's not a huge difference, mind you. A lot of issues can be traced to the modulator system. This is the primary line pressure regulatory mechanism for these transmissions, much like the TV systems are for your 700R4s and 204Rs AODs. So here's the vacuum modulator valve itself. You always want to check the lands, make sure there's nothing unusual in terms of wear, you know, nothing crazy that would lead you to believe that the, you know, this is compromised. Like for example, let's see if I got this little, I don't know if that's factory or not, to be honest. I'll have to compare this to several other modulator valves I have to see if that's normal. I mean, it kind of looks normal, but you know, admittedly, I'm not 100%. All right, governor cover, half inch. All right, these TH350s and 700R4s all use the same style of governor, however, they're not directly interchangeable. All these 4 bolts are loose. And then the speedo reluctor pickup is also loose. Interesting. I just noticed that. Look here. So this got damaged. This is not supposed to, you know, slide on and off like that. I'll show you. So we'll have to report that in and figure out specifically what output shaft he's going to need in replacement or gear. Be that as it may, that's going to be a problem for after the video. So here's your governor cover, a little gasket, a new one will come in the kit. I just want to get this off of here so I don't have to deal with it later. Alright, there is a special tool that I believe Sonics makes that you can check, use to check the integrity for sealing the governor bore. And so if I can dig it up, I'll do that at the end of the video, just at least to demonstrate it. I usually do it once the case is clean. It works as well on 700R4s and TH350s. Looks like this governor gear is new, so that's always a good sign. and then we'll check the governor to see if the valve is moving when the weights are actuated, and well, appears to be working as designed. So for a stock mild performance, it's usually not necessary to modify or replace the governor, or do anything in particular with it, other than to make sure it's functioning with a physical check and a visual inspection like you saw there. The only thing that I would suggest you do, if it hadn't been done already like it has with this particular example, is to replace the governor gear with a brand new one. All right, get these bolts out first for the pump. So 9/16. So 6-bolt pump. There were 8-bolt pumps as well, and I'm referring to the number of bolt hole locations available in the pump body through pump cover stator support. I'm not 100% sure exactly when they transitioned from the 8 to the 6. It was very early in the TH400's life cycle, I do know that. And then I'll flash a chart on the screen that has like all the compatibility between pump stator supports and pump bodies. So if you need parts and you're having to mix and match and scrounge, if you will, to make one good pump assembly, you'll at least have that information. All right, 1/2 inch on your pan bolts. All right, several different variations of TH400 were produced over the years. You have the mainline TH400, which I'm assuming this is, although maybe a heavy-duty version. You have the TH475, which that was the heaviest variant of this family of transmissions. That had straight cut gears instead of the helicoil set, a valve body with a different, more aggressive shift calibration, and I believe hardened spline on the stator, for the pump, as well as the input shaft. So, some advantages here. Now, customer did tell me he dropped the pan to drain the fluid, and he also removed the filter, so that's why you don't see a filter. There is a magnet in the pan, but I do see a little bit of clutch material in here at the bottom. He didn't indicate if he cleaned the pan or not, but it does look like it may have been wiped down. So here you have your filter pickup extension tube. And then, looks like who built it did put the 2 O-rings. You always want to put 2 O-rings here, don't just put 1. So that's good practice. Alright, that bolt's in there good. 1/2 inch. So you have your spacer, you have your washer, and then of course you would have the filter. And the filter would kind of flop around a little bit. That is kind of by design. It's weird, but I mean that's how it is. Alright, detent solenoid. 10 millimeters is going to do it. Yes, sir. So the detent solenoid itself does not look like it was replaced. So these later detent solenoids have a little gasket here. A seal here, so you don't need the metal gasket that comes in the kits for the earlier transmissions, earlier TH400s. Here's another no-no. Don't ever use a purely rubber gasket like this. This looks like an AutoZone gasket. Customer may have tried to service the transmission as well, just to see if it would, bring second gear back, and that's understandable. I mean, that's kind of everybody's first instinct. It's the fluid. Maybe the fluid's bad, so let's see if we can put new fluid in and solve the problem. So, all right, so 1/2 inch and then 7/16 on the valve body to case bolts. So. I'll run out of room for that little bolt bucket. You can buy shift kits for these. Transco makes a decent one. SK TH400, basic shift kit. If you're just looking to correct a few common pattern issues with these things and wake the transmission up a little bit, you can do that. But I typically don't use shift kits for these, just simply because everything that a shift kit would accomplish I can do myself by just changing things like feed orifice sizes, or if necessary making other modifications to the valve body that otherwise maybe those parts or components, procedures would come as part of a shift kit, but you know, it's just more money I'm spending when I may not have to. Alright, so this valve body, even though it's small, can be kind of heavy, so I don't want to crash into the ground. So I'm gonna see if I can like get a decent purchase on it. It looks like it's staying put, but I gotta take loose the governor tubes. There we go. Alright, notice there's a filter in this one right here, so you want to make sure you go back with it with a filter. Alright. Alright, new battery in. So here we have our spacer plate, and our spacer plate, the case gasket. Looks like it's kind of bonded to the valve body, and we also see droplets of water, so this may have been sitting outside. I mean, it was in the bed of his pickup when I went to retrieve it from him, you know, the customer I'm referring to. So, you know, it may have gotten a little bit of water. We had some rain here recently. Alright, so the gaskets that come in, you know, these later TH400s are different than 1987 on the back. I'm just going to grab that other one out of the trash. And it has a provision for an additional check ball in the case. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 check balls. So 6 prior to 87 and 7 check balls. I apologize, I misspoke earlier. I will admit it's been a minute since I've done a TH400. I really don't see them too much anymore. Back starting around 5 years ago, back to when I first started building transmissions about 15 years ago, it was very common for me to get in TH400s, but now everybody wants to do 480Es, so I don't see the TH400s too much. So trying to refresh my own memory as I'm going along here, and you know, I may speak at a turn occasionally, so I apologize for any mistakes I've already made, which I will have annotated, as well as in advance for any I might make. Let's see if anything's been done to this thing. This looks 100% factory to me, so that's good. Alright, so the valve body itself, the one thing that you'll want to keep in mind with respect to these accumulator pistons for your high clutch or your third gear is the piston and the piston for the coast band in the case are a matched set. There was a previous design way back in like the 60s and 70s and such that was different from these, and you cannot interchange them individually. They have to come as a pair, or a service pack, if you will. Okay, service pack is simply the term used for a group of parts that work together. Alright, so here is your coast band servo assembly. That's kind of how it goes together. And then the valve body will be disassembled later. The one thing I will remark about the TH400 valve bodies is you have to kind of beware of the detent and detent regulator valves. They're in the same bore, and sometimes the detent and or detent regulator valve will not want to go back in the bore once you take it out. So my advice is to actually not touch that valve train unless there was some reported issues with the downshifting or inconsistent shifting, erratic, unusual behavior that would lead you to believe that the detent system is culpable. Alright, so I'll get you close enough and we'll zoom in on the case so you can see the check balls. So here's your reverse check ball, here's your intermediate clutch check ball. Other than the additional check ball added starting in 88, all these other check balls can be deleted. They're basically flow control check balls. But this one has to be in there, and so does this one. And like I said, I will have annotated the video probably by now. whether or not you can delete that additional check ball that GM added for performance reasons. All right, low reverse servo cover, 1/2 inch. So TH400s, I believe, had the same low reverse servo design throughout the entirety of production, or maybe the very early models, 64s, 65, 66, somewhere in there. It may have been different, I'm not 100%. Again, I'll annotate, and we see more burnt clutch material. But this design carried forward into the 4L80Es up until 1995, and then 96 they went to a dome style piston, and that dome style piston liked to crack right around here. And so I always install a Sonex billet aluminum piston in its place for those later models. So otherwise, the architecture, parts layout, and arrangement is exactly the same as a 4L80E. I mean, the 4L80E more or less got most of its design from the TH400. The engineers just simply didn't, they said, hey, why fix what's not broken? Let's just carry forward what we can, and then for the overdrive section, I believe the 4L80E took all of that design inspiration, or received it, I should say, from the 204R. All right, so we got this finish nail. I mean, it's technically not a nail, but it looks exactly like a nail. And they bent this out of shape, so, I mean, that's going to be kind of an adventure, I guess, getting it out. I have to use pliers. No complaints with reverse that I'm aware of. Nothing was mentioned. So here is the seal. It's a machine cut square seal. New ones obviously come in the kit. And then you have your 1-2 accumulator piston. And then you have cast steel rings for the accumulator piston itself. That's a butt cut ring. This is an interlock style. And it just comes off. Alright, I'm futzing around with this stuff too much. But anyway, that's the idea. I'll put that there for now. So I got these check balls out. Yes, I did. Let's take out parking pole guide plate. Alright, so I believe I installed this backwards or upside down in one of my videos. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I did. Just know that the easy chair, I mean, it's shaped like a chair, maybe a car seat. The seat faces like this. All right, you could leave your spring here on so that the pole doesn't interfere with the gear set when you go to take it out. And then, of course, here's your aforementioned little governor tube filter screen. Goes right here. New one will come in the kit. And then you have a nut here. I think that's 1/2 inch. Maybe it's 9/16. No, it's 9/16 or 9/16 or 15 millimeter. One of those two. Let's try the 15 and see if that works. I know GM was in the process of switching over to some stuff to metric. So 15 inch fits this like a glove. Alright, there we go. Let me grab pliers so I can manipulate that whatchamacallit. So I can remove it once the pump is out. Alright, I should be able to yank it out once pump's out of the way. Alright, so unfortunately we can't take selector out until pump's out of the way. And here I am trying to do it. Alright, so we need a 3/8 12-point socket for our center support feed bolt. That was loose. That could be why the intermediate clutch burned, if in fact it did burn. I have a feeling it did. This should be torqued to like roughly, I think, somewhere between 25 and 30 foot-pounds. This was like probably no more than, you know, quarter past snug, if that. So obviously a problem. All right, let's get this crap out of the way. And then we'll turn the case so that you can see the guts inside when I take them out. All right, just coming behind the pump, and then I like to keep a hand over the input shaft so that nothing else but the pump comes out with the pump. All right, select the washer here. These are fiber. All different sizes are available, both from GM as well as the aftermarket. So failing to dialing in front end play, there's really no excuse other than laziness, to be honest. So plenty of flexibility here for you to do what needs to be done. Pump the case gasket. So what I'm looking for here is, you know, any breaks or tears in the gasket. I don't see any. As you can see, it's Trans-Tech, so, you know, definitely sign that the pump was, or the transmission was overhauled. All right, where's my 1/2 inch? Get on there. All right, sometimes these pumps can be worn. So if that's the situation, then, well, you obviously have to go find another one or buy a Reman unit, and they have their own risks. So you notice here we have 3 different bolt lengths for the stator to stator support to pump body. So here's your long bolt, and you have 2 intermediate length bolts that go in those 2 positions respectively, and then you have 2 short bolts that go over here in these 2 locations. And again, this is pretty obvious, and you can see the difference in height. You know, the bosses where the bolts go, but you know, I'll point it out just the same. Okay, cast steel rings on the stator here for your forward drum. My recommendation is to install Teflon 480 center support sealing rings in place of the cast steel rings. I'm not gonna mess with it. All right, that's my recommendation. And these also have issues with high line pressure, so always replace that boost valve with a Sonex boost valve. If Sonex makes a boost valve available for a given unit that I'm working on, that's what I'm going to buy, provided it has O-rings. So don't skimp on you know, this kind of stuff. All right, so a lot of water in here. So let's take a quick gander at the working surfaces. I mean, this looks okay, but I would bet a fair amount of money that that surface is warped, so it'll get turned on the lathe. And this thing's annoying me. Let's get these stupid rings off. Yeah, I mean, most of these pumps are going to need some work. You know, they've been through the ringer, you know, multiple overhauls over the course of the life of the transmission, you know, especially early TH400s. And I mean, let's face it, folks, sometimes neglect the transmission relative to the engine or compared to the engine. You know, most people will keep up with oil changes to an extent, but when it comes to servicing the trans, it's not as big of a priority. So just take your straight edge along with either a 1 thou feeler gauge or a flashlight, and, you know, run it right across here and see if you can spot light peeking through the underside of the straight edge, or if you can get a feeler gauge 1 thou to pass. If you can, then just, or if it's scored up, just turn the surface and make it flat again. So very straightforward deal. Check splines here, and you have a bushing here and a bushing here. Both of those need to be replaced. And then, of course, check journal, check structure. Boost valves under a lot of spring tension, so just be aware of that. I'm just looking at these splines now. I do all my critical inspections after all parts have been cleaned off. I don't even bother looking at parts critically, like to make decisions on whether or not they're reusable when they're dirty like this. Alright, so here is your drive gear. Notice the flats are biased or offset to the rear. That's how you want it when you go back with it. Okay, this set looks new, and I'm venturing to guess this pump body may have been a Reman body and or possibly a whole Reman pump assembly. Hard to tell for sure, but you know, I'm venturing to guess that is the case. So let's take a look at the crescent, because that's arguably the most critical part of the body, and that's where you're going to find wear, if wear is to be found. So you see a little bit of wear here at the crescent, a lot of wear, or if you see this thing straight up dug out, that would indicate to me excessive bearing clearance, or you know, very worn bearings in the main line of the engine. So you know, crankshaft would need new bearings. Okay. The other thing that I would suggest to folks is when they have the transmission out, especially on these older vehicles, do an end plate check on the engine, or you know, longitudinal thrust check. If it's excessive, then again the engine's going to have to be dealt with, because you put the rebuilt transmission back into the vehicle with an engine that poor a shape, it's probably going to damage or do some damage to the pump. This nasty ass fluid out of the way. Alright, forward drum. So these transmissions are pretty robust. I mean, there's really not a whole lot of upgrading you need to do until you get into really big power levels. You know, very, very, I guess as close to as bulletproof as you can get. I mean, they're a heavy-duty transmission, largely equivalent to the Ford C6 and the Chrysler 727. I mean, that's what we had back then. So for GM, Ford, and Dodge. Okay, check your plate there for your your clutch pack. That's basically your backing plate. It's also the the 2-3 clutch hub, or third gear direct clutch hub. You have your thrust washer here, and I was going to say there should be a bronze thrust washer or plastic on the other side, and there is. So that looks like it might have been reused, but this one is new, or at least that's not factory original. All right, let's take a look at the clutch pack. So we have 5 and 5. You can do 6 and 6 in here if you want. I believe the 475s were like that. I have a whole series on the channel rebuilding a TH475, which incidentally I still have that transmission sitting in a spare bedroom closet. These look okay. No concerns. And the steels may be new. Whatever Reman company did this, they may have put a steel module. And to remark about the bushings, the stator bushings, see if this, first look at the pump body bushing. Alright, so something else I didn't see, this got nicked up. You can see that right there. So I'll have to figure out how that happened, but this bushing may have been replaced as part of the Reman, but I don't believe these bushings were replaced. They look original to me. Normal wear on the steels, you see an occasional slip mark here and there. Nothing unusual for a heavy-duty transmission, and the driver would not have felt that. Now we'll just leave that there. Alright, direct clutch. So let's see if this spag is bad. No. That's perfectly healthy. So, freewheels clockwise, locks counterclockwise. Very interesting. Alright, we got a traditional snap ring in here. We will upgrade this to a spiral lock ring. This whole drum is going to be changed out. You can see some wear here on the band surface. I mean, that's not the reason we're doing it. We're going to upgrade the 4LEDE drum and do some other things inside the case to beef it up a little bit. He's going to use this primarily for towing and hauling, so He wants something that will last and be durable, you know, be able to withstand the rigors of that kind of work. All right, so I'm calling this a Sprague. It's really a roller clutch. This is an 8-element design, 8 or 10. I'm not sure which, but either way, it's inferior to the dog bone style Sprague that went into the 97 and up 4L ADEs, and that's what we're going to put on here, and that's why we're upgrading the drum. Early TH400s, I think up to 1970, had a smooth inner race, which you then can install retro that heavy-duty 34-element board Warner Sprague assembly. If you're fortunate enough to have one of those units, then that's exactly what I would do. You don't have to do anything else to the drum itself. Just install that Sprague and you're good to go. You may want to measure the diameter of the inner race just to make sure it's serviceable. In other words, it hasn't been worn down or something like that. I don't know how common that would be, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's just something you may want to consider doing. Alright, so we have a 4L80E style cushion plate. So this was introduced to TH400s and then carried forward into the 4L80s. And then let's see, we have some pretty toasty direct clutches. So a lot of slippage occurring here. Check the backing plate. It's glazed. There's some slip marks. And then there's a toasty friction. A lot of slippage on that steel. Friction. Steel. And same story. Frictions are coned. They're not flat anymore. All right. So there are different pistons that came to TH400s. Some were aluminum like so, some were stamped steel. The ones that were stamped steel, they had selectable supports or apply rings, and just depending on which number you had will determine how many friction discs you could fit into the drum. So if you're doing some high performance, you obviously want the shortest apply ring if you're doing a stamped steel piston setup, so that you can add as many frictions and seals into that clutch pack as possible. Alright, so somebody was into manual second pretty aggressively here. I mean, this is nice and clean. I mean, it is completely free of friction material. So, alright, let's go ahead and look at the intermediate clutch. So I think I said at the beginning by mistake that I thought that the Sprague was broken. The Sprague was working. It's the clutch that's failed, and both have to hold. But I would think the second clutch, your intermediate clutch, would have to be holding for you to shift into third gear, because the intermediate clutch itself does not come off at any point in time once you hit second gear. Nice and toasty. Yeah, so this thing was definitely ridden hard and put away wet, so to speak. I mean, not super abnormal, but you know, is what it is. Don't ever reuse these intermediate clutch snap rings for TH400s 4L80s. Always install a Chrysler A518 or 46, 47, 48 RE Ford clutch selective snap ring in that position. For 4L80s, I typically use the 88,000s to sometimes the 75,000s. TH400s, the 106,000s, or if I'm running a 4L80E 4-clutch stack, depending on exactly what I'm doing and what particular parts I'm using, I may end up with the 88 thou snap ring in there. Let's see if we can get this out. This is a non-opportune location for what I'm trying to do or needing to do. There we go. So this is beveled, just like the 480Es. You want the bevel side facing you or facing to the front of the case. And that's center support snap ring. All right, so at this point, we can actually pull the entire gear set out of the case. So center support on back to everything else, output shaft. And for that, let's grab a tool. So lifting tool, I mean, if you watch my other videos, 480Es and even TH400, you've seen it before. Basically engages the main shaft and allows you to yank everything out of the case. So I'm going to just grab it like so. Just pull forward. And then I want to scrape everything on the bottom of the case, so I'm just going to help it along. Carefully put it on the bench. Alright, remaining in the case are going to be the anti-fretting ring. So it's a thin snap ring. It goes behind the center support, early TH400s. I believe prior to 1969 or 1970, these lugs were thicker. There was no anti-fretting ring, and they would react with the case and ultimately wear the case out. So we then decided to put an anti-fretting ring in place and change the thickness of the lugs to account for that fretting ring. Alright, so this band looks like it was replaced when they went through this thing. So band looks like it's in good shape. So maybe not a lot of time in manual low. Alright, now where in the world's that steel 3-tab washer? It's right here. So this is selective. Whenever I go back with a TH400, I don't care what the application is or what the person is going to be doing with the vehicle, engine power, and all that. I always rollerize the case. TH350 pump bearing installed technically upside down or backwards, so that the larger half of the bearing, the one that envelops the smaller half, faces out or faces you. The reason you want to do that is so that when you have the bearing, or excuse me, when you have the bushing here protruding into the case, to locate the bearing, you don't want that bearing, or at least a half of it that rotating directly against the bushing, because eventually it's going to cut it right in half at that junction. And so you'll decapitate the bushing right here, and of course you'll have nothing to locate the bearing. Alright, let's see how thick this thrust washer is. Looks like it's right at 100 thousandths of an inch. Alright, that's basically it as far as the case. So I can get this thing to stand up. And I got this detent. Alright, now I should be able to yank out this nail here. Forgot about that. There we go. I believe these nails are actually hardened. They're not like a typical finish nail that you might buy at the hardware store, use in home improvement or whatever. Alright, rooster comb, just like this, on your parking rod assembly. I admit I completely forgot about that nail. Alright, selector. And it does not want to come out. You know what? I'm going to put it after the video. Let's take a look at the gear train and then we'll close. Alright, so the band surface on this front planet is pretty warped. I mean, you have a lot of undulation in there. That's not good for the band. So this is a low roller clutch rotation, so holding the planet, you can free spin the center support counterclockwise and it will lock clockwise. Alright, center support, and then you have your sun gear down here, sun gear shaft, and then you have your front planet with the low roller clutch assembly. And then this one has a little oil slinger or oil dam that goes between the front and the rear planet. And then this bearing here, if you didn't already see, goes on the front of the sun gear. And let's take a look at the bushings in the sun gear shaft. A lot of times transmission builders, Reman companies won't replace these because the aftermarket ones sometimes they're too tight and they will bind on the main shaft journals, or the main shaft journals are out of round anyway, and same thing, and they just don't want to bother with clearancing the bearings. I mean, that's a pain in the ass. Well, this is interesting. I don't think they lined this up as they should have. I mean, I made it a point not to disturb the mesh here when I pulled these two things out of the rear planet, and so that's a big no-no. I'm surprised that didn't cause some sort of like lube-related hard part failure back here. Alright, this bushing looks original, was not replaced. I remember Jake's Performance writing, Jake over at Jake's Performance writing that he actually doesn't like to replace the bushings in these front planets because the aftermarket bushings are often out of spec and they're too wide, so they leave too much clearance between the bushing and the rear journal here on the center support, which incidentally, this is where the other part of the bearing assembly goes. So you have a thrust washer that goes in here like so, just like a 4L80E, and they have that other bearing half. So here's the whole bearing half, or the whole bearing assembly rather. And that's for the sun gear to the center support thrust. Alright, low roller clutch assembly. You will not reuse it. Some folks will like to go like this and say, well, yeah, as long as it doesn't, when you shake it, it doesn't start kicking out rollers, it's probably fine, but I don't subscribe to that belief, to be perfectly honest. It's just not, this is consumable and I want to replace it. So other than this band surface, this planet appears to be okay. There's no bluing, no cracks, no fracturing anywhere on the structure. The housing itself appears to be okay. I'll take this to my machinist and see if he can just sand this down. A lot of times that fixes it, so you don't have to replace it. So that'll be a question for him. And then for your rear planet, you have a 4-tab washer here. And then on the back of the output shaft flange, there is another 4-tab Babbitt style washer, which I prefer to put here because I won't need this washer anymore, nor will I need this one in this location when I'm rollerizing the rear of the case. And I'm fumbling around with it. That was on there, did not want to come out. Alright, I'm going to have to move that silly drum. So I'm going to change the camera angle. And then I'm going to put this thing in upside down so that we have access to this snap ring here. And then we just take it out of there. So other than the soft part failure, nothing super damning, as I almost destroy my finger. I swear, I mean, I could do this literally with my eyes closed, blindfolded, if I wasn't filming. But it's because I'm filming, all of a sudden this is now impossible to do. I mean, yeah, the snap ring is tough, don't get me wrong, but it's not that tough. I mean, look at this. This is absurd. And it's the kind of day I'm having so far. I'm really not having a good day, just to be perfectly honest with you. A lot of things going wrong, not necessarily in the shop, but I have a 4L80E that was supposed to be inbound to me and delivered today, and the freight company that I have hired to deliver it to me, well, they seem to have lost the, they have lost the shipment. They ended up sending it somewhere else, and I got a box of parts for, big rigs and, semi trucks that obviously I don't need. I need this customer's transmission. That's what I need. So forgive me, I'm a little distracted at the moment. I mean, I still like to create content and all, but right now I have that kind of emergency in the back of my mind, and so it's kind of what's going on to some extent. All right, check journal here, check worn gear, check splines, all the usual things you would check, for these transmissions, at least the output shaft. All right, this bushing was not replaced. That's original, or if it was replaced, it was replaced many, many years ago. All right, so here is going to be your rear ring gear, and then of course you have your bearing, at least the back half of it. And I get the rest of it. So it goes in like this. Later 4LEDs have cutouts here to allow lube to flow, owing to the design change to that center lube design. So here's your TH400 planets. Okay, these are different in this area here where my fingers are relative to 4LEDE planets. 4LEDE planets, especially with the two-wheel drives or 1991 to 93 4x4s, have a pickup ring pressed on to the rear planet. And so if you need to swap planets, and you need the the sensor ring or reluctor gear, you're not going to be able to use a TH400 planet in its place. Now 94 and up you can through end of production in 1998, because these planets are all the same otherwise from a gear ratio perspective, dimensionally on the pinions. The sun gears are dimensionally the same. It's not until 1999 they completely changed the design of the planetaries and the sun gear and everything else, that you can no longer prospectively install TH400 planets into 4LEDs, and that applies to the front planet and the rear planet. All right, get this out of the way. All right, so the shaft itself and the sun gear, you just want to make sure that there's no splines heavily worn and no teeth on the gear are chipped or fractured. That's how you want to have it arranged, so that these two lube ports are aligned with each other. You want to pay close attention to the face of the teeth as well. That's where I see some like flaking, if you will, sometimes, and if I see that, then obviously the sun gear gets replaced. All right, as far as the case itself, you want to check all your bores. So governor bore, obviously, bore for your servo and your 1-2 accumulator. So I can get you so you can see things. Check your pump bore here too for any scoring, any scarring, anything unusual. But all in all, this transmission looks like we just had the normal kind of wear and tear from intense usage. Burnt intermediate clutches and burnt direct clutches are par for the course. Now we're going to dual feed the direct clutch in this transmission so that he can have basically 2 to 2.5 times greater apply surface area, and thus holding capacity for towing and hauling, and that just makes sense. This direct drum will be replaced with a 4LEDE late model drum that has the smooth and erase for the 34 element heavy duty sprag. Incidentally, the low roller, or the intermediate roller clutch held. It was just bad intermediate frictions. What else? Pump will probably have to be replaced. I have to clean it off, inspect it, and all that good stuff. But I'm guessing it's going to need, at minimum, the stator support needs resurfacing. The body may be okay. There's a little bit of wear on the crescent. I'll have to really eyeball it. The rest of it looks okay. Valve body, these valve bodies are fairly resilient, other than that aforementioned D10, D10 regulator valve train, which again, sometimes the bore there goes out around and you cannot get the valve back in. And so I won't take that valve out as long as it's moving freely and it's not binding or catching or otherwise hung up. Then I'll go ahead and just leave it in there and clean the rest of the valve body off. All right, here you have your heavy duty spring retainer for your intermediate return spring, you know, piston, etc. See if I can get it out. There we go. So you can have 1, 2, 3, or all 4 springs. For high performance, put all 4 of them in. Otherwise, this spring configuration is fine, provided you're not running your intermediate clutch clearance too tight. If you want to run it tight, then I would recommend you install 12 springs. Okay, this is a piston that was carried forward into the 4L80Es up to 95. And it's always recommended you use a heavy-duty spring retainer in place of the flimsy return spring assembly that comes in 4L80Es, because they can, you know, bend and distort and all that. Especially, again, under high power, high RPM, and so forth. Okay, this looks like it has all of its springs except for one here and one right there is the direct clutch. So that should be fine. For low RPM, you know, towing and hauling, that shouldn't be an issue. It's the dual feeding that we're going to want to do. And the best way to do that is to take a piston, you know, TH400 piston, machine it to allow for 6 clutches and 6 steels. And for high RPM, drill like a 60 thou auxiliary bleed orifice in the drum. I usually drill it opposite of the main bleeder ball capsule, so that you prevent centrifugal apply. High rate return springs will then, you would add them, and you know, between those measures you've taken, you will not have any clutch drag or centrifugal apply at very, very high RPMs. You'll mitigate that risk. Now we have all the parts cleaned off, so I wanted to get a little bit more into detail about the switcheroo that occurred between the forward and direct drum apply pistons. So I'm not going to rehash too much of anything we already covered in the teardown portion of the video itself, but I do want to address this because I guess for whatever reason the Reman company felt like they had to put a forward piston, and you can tell it's a forward piston by this F here on the bottom side, into the direct drum and vice versa. So this is a direct drum piston, and what is common practice to do is just machine this down the equivalent of 1 friction in steel, so that you can squeeze 6 frictions and 6 steels in the direct drum here. Now physically, technically, these 2 pistons will go back and forth in interchange between the 2 drums. However, it is my recommendation you do not do this, simply because this piston is not nearly as strong and robust as this one is. The forward clutch pack does not really work once it's applied. Once it's applied, it just stays applied until you take the transmission out of a forward range position. So maybe you put it into park, neutral, or reverse, then the forward clutch will come off. But as long as you're moving forward, it stays applied. So it's not really working once it's, you know, initially applied, or it's not really shifting. So it's not coming off and on like the direct clutch is. So it's not going to see torsional stress, especially at higher to wide open throttle angles, that this clutch will see. So the only thing beyond what I just covered that I'll touch on or revisit is the pump. So here I have a straight edge, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a 1/1000 feeler gauge, and I'm going to see if I could squeeze that underneath at any point. So we see here toward the center of the working surface, it's no longer flat. Okay. And we can sort of fit it at least part way underneath around in this area here, and that's why you see these orange dots. Those are areas that I was able to either partially or totally fit this feeler gauge underneath. And we can kind of do the same with the pump body and the gears to evaluate those. Alright, and you obviously want to have all your parts cleaned up when you're doing these kind of checks. You don't want to have nasty, dirty fluid everywhere, because not only is that disgusting, it can actually color the results and render them inaccurate. Alright, and if you were to take a depth micrometer, I believe that you would see this crescent is slightly different in terms of its height relative to the rest of the deck. So, probably going to avoid the crescent if at all possible. So as far as body, deck to gear face surface, this appears to be good. And then you can measure here as well. And there's specs for these also. And then lastly, you just want to physically or visually check the outer diameter of the driven gear to make sure it's not scored up. I mean, this one's got a little wear to it. These gears could probably stand to be replaced. So all in all, not too bad. Preponderance of the damage in this thing was soft part related, so you know, the 2 clutch packs and the band for the coast, or manual second, just completely smoked, but forward clutch and low reverse band were okay. As far as hard parts, the direct drum technically doesn't need to be replaced. We're doing that, but for different reasons. You can just sand the band surface there, and that should clean it up. And I would do it on a lathe. I wouldn't sand it by hand. And as far as the pump is concerned, we saw that it just needs to, again, be reconditioned. The stator support's not flat. Again, that's something you can deal with a lathe. Pump body needs a new set of gears, but other than that, it should be good to go. Alright, now as far as the work of the Reman company itself, again, a bit of a mixed bag, and that's really all you can expect from these large, big box remanufacturers. Okay, some bushings were replaced, most of them were not. They played a little switcheroo game with the forward and direct clutch pistons. Again, ill-advised, and then when they assembled the transmission, they did not line up the lubrication holes in the sun gear and sun gear shaft, which again is a no-no. I don't know who put all the RTV everywhere. I mean, that could have happened, you know, well after the Reman company went through it. I've not seen remanufacturing companies just goop RTV everywhere. That's usually done by the end user. So, anyway, that's the video. If you have any questions, comments, go ahead and leave them below. If there's anything else you want me to cover when it comes to TH400s, please go ahead and suggest, and or make a comment there to that effect, and I will get to it as soon as I can. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching as always. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks again.